smoothly.
Kathy is working on the video here. I hope you're taking an opportunity to look up the church on the internet if you're involved with that. Our website has been getting over 500 hits each month. That means that 500 different people have at least looked at our website. That's kind of cool. And the messages are up there each week now for the last several months. And so if you are not here and you're interested in following along in Genesis with us, that's an opportunity for you to do that. Some of you have heard this story of the old woodsman. Been out in the woods for years and years working with an axe, and he decided to go modern. And so he bought his first chainsaw. He had used an axe all of his life, but he kept hearing that these chainsaw things could improve your production. You could cut a cord of wood in a fraction of the amount of time that you would do it with an axe. And so he went to the store and he bought the best chainsaw you can buy. A few days later he came back and he complained to the sales clerk that the saw wasn't any good. He said, I can cut more wood with my axe than I can with this thing. So the clerk looked at the chainsaw, checked the oil, moved the chain, made sure it was on the track and on the bar and working properly, checked the level of the oil and so forth, checked the spark plug. Everything seemed to be okay. And so he pulled the cord of the chainsaw and the motor started up immediately, and the woodsman jumped back in alarm, exclaiming, "What's that noise?" The old woodsman had all that power and opportunity in his hands. He just didn't know how to use it. It's kind of like your pastor and his cell phone. You know, I don't even carry it here in town. Well, I actually don't carry it anywhere, just about, because I don't know how to use it. There are so many features on the cell phone that same as that woodsman. You know, if I was in a car wreck, I wouldn't know how to photograph the car or anything. I couldn't take a picture of it. I couldn't send it to somebody or save it for anyone. I'm a technological cripple at that point. The old woodsman, he had all that power and technology at his fingertips, but he couldn't avail himself of it. And in our passage today, we're going to learn that God has a plan and He has the resources and He wants to rejuvenate our spirits, but it's up to us to avail ourselves of these blessings. We can't just expect it to happen, because it won't. It won't. All right. And so let's look today in our passage, Genesis chapter 45, and put a few of the verses on the back of the bulletin, but we're going to begin with the first set of verses 9 through 15. We're going to go back last week into last week's passage by one verse. Verses 9 through 14, we have Joseph's revelation of his plan. Remember the story, Joseph now is number 2 guy in all of the world. And the world is in a time of famine, and everybody's coming to buy their food from Joseph. And he's the guy in charge. And his brothers come from Canaan, about 250 miles away. They come and they seek to purchase food, and he recognizes them. And we've gone through this whole situation where now he's revealed himself to them. And he says to them in verse 9, hurry and go up to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me and do not delay. Verse 10, and you shall go, you shall live in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near me, you and your children and your children's children, and your flocks and your herds and all that you have. There I will also provide for you, for there are still 5 years of famine to come, lest you and your household and all that you have become impoverished. And behold, your eyes see, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin see, that it is my mouth which is speaking to you. In other words, he's not speaking through an interpreter, but is this Egyptian that stands before them is now speaking to them directly in Hebrew, in their own language, and it's Joseph's own mouth with which he's speaking. Verse 13. Now I must tell you, now you must tell my father, in all of all my splendor in Egypt, and all that you have seen, and you must hurry and bring my father down here. It's been 22 years. He wants to see his father. He's anxious to see his father after all those years. Remember, he was the favorite son when he was sold. Verse 14, then he fell on his brother Benjamin's neck and wept. And Benjamin wept on his neck. And he kissed all his brothers and wept on them. And afterward his brothers talked with him. Big reunion. But Joseph has a plan. He's developed this plan whereby he's going to help them. And so he says, hey, there's 5 more years of famine. I want you to move near me. Live near me. Verse 10 is the first thing. This is like the grandparents' life verse. Verse 10, you shall live, you shall be near me, you and your children and your children's children, and your flocks and your herds and all that you have. All the grandparents I know wish they lived near their children, but not too near. I have a personal philosophy that all of your children should live about between 2 and 4 hours away. That's just about right, because you can get there real quick if you want to visit, but it's not so close that they're just going to be coming over and hanging out every evening, catching dinner. That's just me. He says, I want you to live near me. You shall be near me and your children. Joseph is anxious to renew his relationships with his family. And so he does. Verse 11, he says, and let me help you. Verse 11, there I will also provide for you, for there are still 5 years of famine to come. You're going to, you think the first 2 years have been bad? There's 5 more years coming, and it's going to get worse. Let me help you, he says to them. And that's a great thing when a family can help other parts of the family in time of crisis. It's a beautiful thing. One thing I want us to notice as we look at this part of the passage, there's no recounting of the dream. Remember the dream? This is a dream come true. That's the title of the message in the bulletin. This is a dream come true. Remember his dream as a 17-year-old? He said to his brothers, I had a dream, all the stars and the moon and the sun bowed down to me. And you don't hear him giving out the old I told you so here. He doesn't, it's not recorded that he brought up the dream. Remember? Well, now look, who's bowing to who, He could have come on very negatively, and we see that he has matured somewhat since he was that teenager. Sometimes kids don't handle that kind of information, that prophecy that God gave Joseph. Sometimes young people don't handle that kind of powerful information very well. And Joseph did not. He put off his family. Of course, God uses it then to move him to Egypt and so on. So Joseph reveals his plan. In the next few verses, Joseph lists out his resources. This is a man that is the most rich man, the richest man in all of the world next to Pharaoh. And he has power, he has all the wealth imaginable, he has all the stuff that goes with it, a nice place to live, and so forth. Verses 16 to 23. Now when the news was heard in Pharaoh's house, that Joseph's brothers had come, it pleased Pharaoh and his servants. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Say to your brothers, do this, load your beasts and go to the land of Canaan, and take your father and your households and come to me, and I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you shall eat of the fat of the land. Now you are ordered," verse 19, this is an order, "do this, take wagons from the land of Egypt for your little ones and for your wives, and bring your father and come. And do not concern yourselves with your goods, for the best of all the land of Egypt is yours." Wow. That's like Publishers Clearinghouse has landed at their door and said, "You have won $5,000 a week for the rest of your life." And not only that, but now they do one forever. You've seen the advertisement for that? You get to pick one of your grandkids, and that $5,000 a week, supposedly, will go on to that grandkid after you're gone. Well, everybody thinks that's about the best that you can do in this life. And that's what happens to Joseph's family. They've won the Publishers Clearinghouse. Verse 21, "Then the sons of Israel did so, and Joseph gave them wagons according to the command of Pharaoh, and gave them provisions for the journey. To each of them he gave changes of garments, but to Benjamin he gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of garments. And to his father he sent as follows: 10 donkeys loaded with the best things of Egypt, and 10 female donkeys loaded with grain and bread and sustenance for his father on their journey." And so, as a symbol, as an indication, he sends this wealth of blessing with his brothers to go back to their father. So in verse 19, we learn that Pharaoh is happy. Pharaoh is pleased. There's a couple reasons why this might be. One is that I think they actually kind of like each other. Pharaoh respects Joseph, but I think he's also come to be a friend of Joseph. Joseph has adapted himself into the Egyptian culture. He has an Egyptian wife, 2 sons, which God has given him as a blessing. And in all this time, it appears from Scripture that Joseph really didn't talk much about his past. And so now this kind of fills in a picture for Pharaoh, like his best friend maybe. And suddenly now Joseph, he's not just a slave that he pulled up out of prison, but he actually comes from another country where he has a family and a certain amount of wealth. They brought some gifts, if you recall from last week. They brought some gifts with them as they came in an effort to appease this harsh master that they were appearing before. And so Pharaoh was pleased, and he gives Joseph orders. I'm picturing Joseph now saying, when Pharaoh starts talking about, hey, tell your brothers to take these beasts and go get your father and bring him. And Joseph saying, no, you don't have to do that. And Pharaoh says in verse 19, this is an order. This is an order. Take wagons and bring your wives and little ones and your father. And that's a long trip, 250 miles. And so he made it easy for them. Verse 20 is interesting. He says, don't even concern yourselves with your goods, for the best of all the land of Egypt is yours. So not only does he say, bring your family, but he tells them, don't worry about all them old tents and junk that you have around your yard. He says, you just come, we'll give you all new stuff, anything you need. That's quite a resource. We have a God that treats us like that. Yeah. We don't need to bring all our stuff along. He's going to give us everything we need. As I thought about this, I thought about the Beverly Hillbillies. Remember the start? Beverly Hillbillies driving into Hollywood, California in their old Model T or whatever it was, with all that junk in the back of the car that they were hauling with them. When they got there, they found out they really didn't need much of that junk. I think the only thing they kept probably was Granny's rocking chair. But Pharaoh says, don't worry about that stuff. That's just going to drag you down. You don't have to worry about loading it all up and hauling it. Just, dump it. And he says, I want you to come and get a fresh start. Yeah. And that's what we get when we tap into the resources available to us. We get a fresh start. And thank the good Lord for that. I don't know about you, but I need a fresh start just about every day. We start off and Lord, help me through another day. All right, verse 24. We have Joseph's revelation of his plan, and we have Joseph's resources. Now in verse 24, we have Joseph's reminder to his brothers. An interesting one, I think. He said to his brothers away, and as they departed, he said to them, do not quarrel on the journey. Isn't that an interesting thing for him to say? But keep in mind who he's talking to. These guys are, they're known to not be that nice. You remember the discussion from a couple weeks ago. Reuben was saying, see, I told you we shouldn't kill him. Yeah. And didn't I do this? And there's this squabbling going on. You can just hear him say, well, it was Judah's fault. He's the one that said, sell him to the slave trader. And on and on. It would be real easy for these guys to get into a quarrel on the way back to their father. Remember, on the way back to their father, they've got to come up with a story. Yeah. That's going to be something. And so it'd be real easy for them to get into the blame game. That's very popular in America today. There's another aspect of it. We know also from watching people that wealth tends to bring friction. It tends to bring strife. We can almost say it's a rule that it brings strife when you come into a lot of wealth. These men have just fallen into huge wealth compared to their previous lifestyle. And it would be, again, not a stretch for us to see them begin to jockey for position, who's going to get what, and so forth. Also, Benjamin received extra portions of wealth. He got the 300 pieces of silver, and he got 5 new outfits. The best that Egypt could offer. And the other guys, they didn't get a lot of silver and stuff. So, lots of opportunities here. And so Joseph's reminder to them, don't quarrel, really has a pretty solid basis. And so he says, I don't want you to quarrel. Verse 25 and 26, we have Joseph's reminder. Verse 24, verse 25 and 26, we have the brothers' report. Then they went up from Egypt and came to the land of Canaan to their father Jacob. And they told him, saying, Joseph is still alive. And indeed, he is ruler over all the land of Egypt. But Jacob was stunned, for he did not believe them. He did not believe them. Are we surprised? I'm trying to picture how you would do this, you know. Hey, Dad, we've got some good news and some bad news. The good news is, check it out. All this wealth is ours. And you can come with us, and we're going to go move into the high-rise neighborhood. Moving on up to the east side. Oh, the bad news. Oh, yeah, well, these last 22 years, when your heart was broken, we were deceiving you. We didn't really kill Joseph. We were just playing a trick on you. Yeah. I can't imagine having to confess that to my dad. Amazing. Somehow they did. And they said, Joseph, he's not dead, he's alive. And Jacob, he just can't, he can't even picture it. I mean, it doesn't fit into his mind. Because for 20 years he's grieved this boy that he thought was dead. Wow. That was a tough time. And of course then that throws into suspicion all their reports. And probably rightfully so. But in the last two verses we find Jacob's rejuvenation. Verse 27 and 28. When they told him all the words of Joseph that he had spoken to them, and when he saw that the wagons that Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. And Israel said, It is enough, my son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die. Imagine how hard it was for him to believe. To believe. It was contrary to all that he had imagined and thought and felt and lived for 22 years. And now he's told that his son is still alive. So one of the reasons he couldn't believe is because it just was too strange. We know people don't come back from the dead. And so it was too hard. Next thing we see also is it's too good to be true. A lot of times we don't believe something because it's too good to be true. I saw somebody sent me a YouTube the other day, and some guy went out on the street and he had Hershey bars in one hand and a 10-ounce bar of silver in the other hand. Maybe some of you saw it. And he'd walk up to people on the street and he'd say, you can have either one, a Hershey bar or a 10-ounce bar of silver. I watched 10 people in a row take a Hershey bar. I think because secretly they felt it was just too good to be true. Maybe it wasn't really silver. But think about it. Silver's like something $16 an ounce now. There's $160 worth of silver right there. I mean, you'd have to go somewhere and convert it.
Yeah.
I could walk somewhere for $160.
Yeah.
I could buy another chocolate bar later. Isn't that funny? Too good to be true. But how many times have we passed something up? People pass up the gospel all the time because it's too good to be true. How can it be that Jesus died so that I don't have to?
Amen.
How can it be that salvation is free, that I don't have to do anything? I don't have to join a church. I don't have to pay for a hospital wing. I don't have to do this and do that. I just have to believe. I just have to believe. That's too good to be true. A lot of people can't accept it because of that. Turns out that also some people have a hard time believing things because sometimes it's easier to believe the bad news or the falsehood. It's just easier for some reason. And again, with the gospel, we don't know why, but it seems to be that people will believe all kinds of things instead of the gospel. John Phillips addresses this subject. He says, Mary Baker Eddy, for instance, can tell people that pain and death are not real, mere errors of mortal mind, and people will believe it. All common sense evidence to the contrary notwithstanding. Joseph Smith can invent a fantastic story about an angel, about being given magic glasses with which to read Egyptian hieroglyphics so that he can translate a great deal of historical and religious nonsense into pseudo-King James English. And people believe it. Millions of people believe it. The Jehovah's Witnesses can claim that Christ returned in 1914, and people believe it. Pope Urban VIII can pontificate that the sun revolves around the earth in the name of papal infallibility, and people believed it, even though Galileo proved that that dogma was incorrect. But tell people the simple truth as it is in Christ, and like Jacob, when told that Joseph was alive, they still will not believe it. We choose to believe the wrong thing. I think that comes, frankly, very often. It's just the blindness of sin. That we choose the wrong thing. That's our nature, our sin nature at work. And, well, Jacob refused to believe. He couldn't believe. And then notice what it says. It says, when he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent. Wagons were pretty rare over in the land of Canaan. But in Egypt, they were used a lot. And when when Jacob saw the wagons, he knew something was up. Something was big was happening because his sons went away with donkeys and returned with a bunch of wagons. And so it says he believed. His spirit was revived. Spirit was revived. He was convinced by the wealth, all the donkeys loaded with grain, stuff, and the wagons to carry him. So Jacob was rejuvenated. I'd like to conclude with a little story that I think is a good conclusion to this passage. A number of years ago, there were some tourists who came to America from an undeveloped Middle Eastern desert-type country, and they visited a large American city. One of the things that impressed them in their hotel, being from the desert, was the constant supply of water. Just go to the faucet, turn on the water. For you see, where they came from, water was very scarce and it was very expensive. And so be able to turn on the faucet and have all the water you wanted, that was quite a luxury. And so when it came time for them to check out, they were found to have some wrenches, and they had decided that if they could take the faucets and take them back with them, they could bless the rest of their people with all this water. We laughed because obviously they've missed the fact that you have to be connected to the source. You have to be connected to the source. The faucet by itself is not going to help them with their challenge. In the same way, many of us Christians live our lives carrying around our Bible. We attend church, we do religious things, but we don't take the time to get connected to the source through prayer, Bible study, really fellowshipping together, loving one another in the biblical sense. This makes us like these guys, walking around with our faucet, but it's not connected to the pipes. It doesn't work. We don't live a full life. God has a plan. He has some resources, and He wants to rejuvenate our spirits. We have to get connected to the source. All right. Let's close by singing hymn number 489. It's actually